Welcome to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst radio network. All past shows are available in podcast form. Pick them up at ArtistFirst.com. Send us your questions and comments to dj@artistfirst.com. And now here they are back from voting. Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Yes, we were out voting just a while ago. No, actually, we voted weeks ago, but that's not what we're here for.
Right.
We're here because it's time. When you say Scott, it's definitely time.
Time we're here.
Time we're here, and tonight's show is about time. It's about time for tonight's show. This could be one long dad joke session.
Oh dear.
Oh no, we're not going to do that because I'll be dead before halfway through. Anyway, so tonight's show, we wanted to talk a little bit about time, and when you say time, I think people get a little confused because I think one of the things you might say, well, okay, we're going to talk about, reference frames and light cones, and we'll throw in some relativistic physics or something, and that's one aspect of time that people talk about. There's also just daylight savings time, and the fact that we just all went through this horrible time change that we subject ourselves to twice a year in the U.S. But I think the aspect of time that interests, I'll say, speak for myself, interests me the most is how fungible, how relative time is. And by that I mean, our intimate experience of life is bound up in time. And I think we often get confused about our concept of our life, which is sort of the mental aspect of our life, which we tend to live in a different time than the actual point at which we're currently existing in. And by that I mean that we spend a lot of our lives, or people spend a lot of our lives, thinking about other times than the moment, other times than the present. A very good example, when we're young, we think about what it'll be like when we're older, when we grow up, when we don't have to, when we don't have to do the things that perhaps we don't like doing about school or whatever the heck it is. Pick your example. So we spend a lot of our youth wanting to be older in a different time. We then spend a lot of our adult life wishing we were younger, and wanting to be in that time, or looking back at and sort of idealizing time. So things were so much better back then, or things were so much. It's the funny thing. Another funny thing about time is that things are always either better, much better than they were, or much worse than they were in memory. You look back and say, oh, things were so wonderful back then, and then someone might remind you, that we didn't have X, Y, Z, or gas was $5,000 a gallon, or your recollections, your memories, which are based on your experiences that obviously were in the past, often are not accurate representations of what actually happened, and they're sort of a way of living in a sense in a past time, but also in an illusory time.
Okay. I'd like to let's set our definitions down of what time actually is.
You're always good at that. Let's start there. See, all that stuff I said was just a waste of time.
No, it wasn't. It's just that in order to understand what particular aspect of time you're looking at, you need to have an agreed definition to start from.
I agree.
Okay, so time as a noun, the indefinite continued progress of existence and events in the past, present, and future regarded as a whole. The second one is a point of time as measured in hours and minutes past midnight or noon.
Like what time is it?
Right, okay. And then the verb, plan, schedule, or arrange when something should happen or be done. Measure the time taken by a process or activity or a person doing it. So these are the reference of time. And what you were talking about had to do with experiential and memory, as it is regarded as a whole.
Yeah.
And then your point somewhere within that wholeness of time. And if you do it that way, it has to do with perspective.
Yes.
Where you are at this point, and then reflecting back to a certain point in that whole time stream and how it may look from where you are, or transferring your consciousness to that point and how it looked back then, or how it may look in the future.
So many great places to jump off from that, but I like that last bit right there because perspective is very important from our own individual perspective. But that concept of being able to shift yourself back and forth is very important for our learning. You know, when you think to yourself, where was I? Pick the time. 10 years ago. It's always, of course, usually it's always in the past, although people tend to project sometimes into an uncertain future. But you oftentimes will gauge your own individual progress, let's say, through the journey of life. It's like, oh, back then I didn't understand, or I was so naive, or now I have so much more wisdom, now I have so much more experience, or now I'm, we tend to, and this is interesting because it kind of echoes our theme. It's the relativisticness of time in the sense that it's relative to where you are now, as well as to where you might have passed through. Your journey through life is a journey through time, obviously, but it's through times, meaning by experiential times. You look at yourself from the current moment, let's say, and then you compare yourself to the past you, to the time when XYZ happened. And maybe I learned something, maybe something happened to me, good or bad. And you can say, well, how I reacted then and how I might react now. People often say, right, if I had known then what I know now, I would do things differently. It's futile from that point of view, but it can also be educational. It can also be sort of, as you said, kind of giving yourself perspective.
Mm-hmm. And when it is a broader point of view, frankly, you're much more stable. Because the tendency of holding your viewpoint to a certain incident that may have happened always colors your perception of the moment. It's only when it's cleared, when you're open to what is exactly happening now, that the fullness of what's going on can come in. Otherwise, it's always through that filter of whether it's an experience or a certain precondition, almost like a prejudice that you're looking through. We always did it that way, instead of looking at it as, well, this is what's happening.
I like that point because I think what you're saying is sometimes you can become stuck in time, even though you're obviously moving through time no matter what. Your perspective can get nailed down to a time, and you then it then colors it. People you'll say of somebody, oh, he or she is living in the past, or they're stuck at this one point which they can't get past. They can't seem to see anything in their current situation other than through the lens of that past event, whatever it might be.
Right. And in being there, or stuck there, as we say, if you stop for a moment and think, what holds you there? Why are you stuck there? What's nailed you to that moment?
Mm.
And it's usually some kind of traumatic event, whether or not it is catastrophic, but it is traumatic to you. And it's usually an emotional tie.
Mm.
This is the beginning of where your trigger is. And when you're triggered, you automatically go into that nailed point in time and space and see everything through what had happened during that experience. So being able to understand that what you're actually doing is transporting your viewpoint to that point. It's not who you are, but it's what you see and what you hold on to. If you can get there, that's more than half the battle. If you can actually see where it's all coming from, then you can decide.
This is wonderful because some time back, not on the Soul of Everyman, but just you and I talking, you talked about integrating your past selves.
Mm.
And I think just to give that a framework, because that's a phrase that maybe people have heard, but what I think what we're really talking about is unnailing these points of you. You as a continuum, all of us as a continuum, we go through life. But we get nailed or stuck, or a piece of us gets stuck in a certain time. And maybe not all the time, but often it's trauma or something that really evoked an intense, usually negative emotional reaction. And maybe positive ones too, but I think when it's positive, maybe you're transported back there, and it's just reliving and re-experiencing and re-enjoying that moment. But with the stuck ones, I think you're brought back there per force, triggered. You're brought back there per force, and you're kind of put through it again. And you sometimes, if you're really stuck, that past self of you is got a charge. It really is nailed. You really left a piece of you behind in that moment, and you can speak to that a little bit better, because I think you did a lot of work with people who were stuck, and you had that perspective, or rather that experience of helping them get unstuck, reconnect with that past leftover part of you that you left back there.
I'm gonna switch the words around a bit. Doing something like that is considered soul retrieval work.
Yeah.
A piece or a shard of your soul is ripped from you or broken from you, and it becomes stuck in that point in time. And again, I say this, it's usually because of an emotional response of some kind. Because frankly, an intellectual response doesn't happen that way. You don't get stuck in time with an intellectual triggering.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because it doesn't have the power. The mind doesn't have the power to. Let me tell you. Emotions have the power to nail you to a point in time. The mind doesn't. The mind can think about the past and can think about the future, but emotions with the trigger will bring you there as though it was happening that moment. And Your heart will pound, and every part of you will react as though that was happening to you right now.
You are actually reliving it in your body.
Mm.
The responses are the same, and the brain patterns are the same.
Mm.
But when it comes to the mind has a different way of containing you, almost trapping you, because it likes to set up these boundaries or walls or pathways of thinking structures, and that can trap you. But when it comes to emotion, you actually get nailed into a point of time because it's experiential that way. Mental concepts, you don't remember what point in time that thought may have occurred to you. It's just like, oh yeah, I had that thought. But when it comes to your emotions and your response and the fact that your body's involved because it's in this particular space-time, it's much more impactful than people want to give it credit for.
Mm.
So when there's that part of you that is stuck, that has been broken off and is stuck back in a point in time, and it colors everything that you look at, or certain things that you look at. It depends on whether or not you're triggered.
Mm.
To become aware of that is the first step. You have to realize that you are not responding through a moment of free will. You have been triggered. And now everything that you're doing is because of this piece that is stuck in that emotional trauma or moment. And you want to have to get that piece back. You must have to, if you think of it in terms of rescuing it, because when it happened to you, you usually are so overwhelmed by the moment you can't look at it. So you actually wind up breaking a piece of your soul off, your energy off, and encapsulating whatever the moment was, the trauma, the viewpoint. And when you encapsulate it, then you can push it off away from you. And there's a part of you that I can't deal with it right now. I'll look at it later. And later can be an hour later, days later, weeks later, years, decades. But that piece that is holding that moment in that energy bubble of your life force is still there, holding it.
Right.
But the problem is, it doesn't have a voice that you actually hear. So it needs this to be processed. So it slips in when there's a moment where it seems like you might be able to deal with it, and that's where the trigger happens. Suddenly, there it is.
And interestingly, the way you described this to me, the part that is broken off of you, or that you break off, because I think there's both mechanisms. It can be broken off of you, or you can break it off. You can, through trauma, I can say, I just need to separate that piece of me. The danger in that is that you literally leave you, a full copy of you, or at least that it can be essentially identified as a piece of your soul, nailed in time with a piece of the energy that is you, keeping it like alive. And the other thing about it, I believe, and this is what you told me, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that when you go back to rescue it, you literally have to dialogue with that earlier part of you with only the experience that it had. And you have to really teach it, really reconnect with it, really kind of tell it that, yeah, we moved on, we grew, we healed, but you never did. And you literally have to rejoin and re-traumatize yourself almost. I mean, you tell me, it was you described it to me, yeah.
No, it's a reassimilation.
Yeah, that's it.
And bringing that piece into you is key. The other, what you have to be aware of is the fact that you may have grown, but that piece didn't. But it's not the fault of that piece.
Nope.
It did the job you gave it to do, which is hold it. It can't live with the whole energetic because it's been separated out. So it doesn't mature with the larger part of the energetic and all the experiences that it has. The larger part almost has to open itself up to receive what this piece that you had told to hold on to something. It has to receive it back. Whatever the trauma was it was holding. And in receiving it, you get to see it all from an older perspective. A more mature perspective. Talking about the relativity of time. And that piece that was holding it, you almost have to bring in like a small child to say, well, this is what we've gone through so far, and allow it to begin to mature and catch up with the rest of you. That's part of the assimilation. But it's fascinating to me because only humans are capable of doing this. There's no other creature that's capable of being able to experience this. And that is the wonder of being truly human.
And I think the danger in some regards, because I think this response is important and essential, because the response of separation, of tearing a piece of yourself off to hold something that you can't deal with right now, can become a scar. It can, if you don't reconnect, because I think what the danger is that you leave your pieces back there and you don't go rescue them. And if you continually leave pieces of yourself back there, it drains you. It makes you unable to function in the now because you're dragging so much of the then with you. You know,
it's not dragging. It's literally you've parceled out pieces of yourself. And the phrase that comes to mind is only the good die young. Because you see so much and for the good you continue to have to deal. And every moment there's a part of you that seems to be taken out of you.
Now, the process of rescuing that person, when you were speaking to me about it before, and when you just said it again now, it occurred to me that it's almost like a partial life review. In other words, the part of you that does a life review at the end of your life goes through your whole life. It can go, if you've never resolved these traumas, you'll see them again then. But in the now, in the moment, you have to go put yourself back and review that piece of you back there, re-accept that piece of you back there, see it again through those eyes, experience the pain again. Almost, and one of the techniques of doing that can be forgiveness, because sometimes the trauma, the reason you're holding on to it is that there's an unforgiveness there.
Right. Well, it's first of all, the fact that you have to go through it is usually, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? That's usually the sequencing. And then if it's a real trauma, usually it doesn't have a logical answer or a pat answer. You have to deal with what you have to deal with right then and there. So are you going to be able to function? Sometimes the encapsulation of the experience is a response because you gotta do something right now. You don't have the luxury of time to concentrate on your reactions and the feelings. You gotta concentrate on this moment right now and what's being demanded of you right now. So you may encapsulate that response that you're having, taking part of your life force and putting it to the side, saying, I'll deal with that later. I've got to do this.
Right. I don't have time to feel that now. I have to deal with that now.
I have to deal with this, whatever this is.
Right.
And I have to be clear-headed in order to do it. I can't be distracted from my purpose in this.
And again, some of the emotions that you feel that make you do that are fear, pain sometimes, or fear. Once you do it, once you encapsulate it, once you put it and say, I can't feel this anymore right now, I have to put it to the side, I have to deal, I think there's a reluctance, an aversion to going back, and then people don't go back, and
right.
Years go by, and what happens is what you spoke of in the beginning. That piece still wants to be heard. You've muted it, you've encapsulated it, you've torn it off, but it is as powerful as you were then, maybe even more so in some regards, and it wants to be heard. So then your current life, the current you, is, I don't mean dragging it along the way I was saying, the way you corrected me, you said correctly, it's not dragging, but the piece that's left in the past, or the pieces, will find a way to trigger you, to bring you back without your volition. Because I think the rescue part is a volitional thing. It's like, I'm going back there, and I'm going to maybe take years to find a way to re-accept this, to bring it back. But the other way is that piece just reaches up, unbeknownst to you, without any warning, and drags you back into it, as though you were falling into a pit. And you, as you said, everything that you felt then, you're suddenly feeling now, and you're doing things in the present that have little relationship to what triggered you. So what I'm trying to say in an inartful way is that if you don't go back and rescue it, it will come and get you and bring you back. Maybe not to rescue you, but it will bring you back, because it's you, as powerful as you are, with all the subtleties of who you are. It will grab you and bring you right back to that trauma. So it's important to realize that we are multi-dimensional in time beings. If you leave a piece of yourself back there, it's still you. It's still connected to you.
No, you can't encapsulate it and expect it not to be anymore. Like,
right.
Because some people feel that, well, I put it in a bag and I'm shoving the bag under the table so I won't see it anymore.
Right.
And they think that they've taken care of it. And it's like, no, this is a living, breathing life piece of you. So you need to come back to it, because you can't be fragmented like that without great detriment to yourself.
And I think what you mentioned before, people think that they're taking care of it by stuffing it, let's say, into a encapsulation. But the more you do that, the less of you that's left. It can become, that thing can become more powerful than the current you, because you've segregated so much of yourself into you. It can take you over. It can become, in essence, like a monster of yourself.
Well, if someone is, let's say, for instance, you've grown up in a family where anger was not permitted. So you kept stuffing the anger. Every time you were angry, you had to stuff it somewhere. And it builds. That frequency will build and build and build and build. And you have half a second to be able to realize it. And I think we've reached.
Let's take a break from all this anger, and put our past selves in the past for a minute, and we'll go back to the studio, have a little break, and we'll come back on the other side and talk more about the relativity of time.
There is a Reaper is the story of 5-year-old Christopher Aaron and his life-changing struggle with leukemia. Winner of both the Indy Bragg Medallion as well as the reader's favorite silver medal for memoir, There is a Reaper has more than 100 Amazon book reviews and a 5-star rating. It has been described as life-changing, spiritual, a must-read. Just released on Audible and iTunes, this memoir is also available in paperback and on Amazon Kindle for only 99 cents. Get your copy of this life-changing memoir today.
Taking God on Patrol is a first-person account of the world of law enforcement from the perspective of a Christian police officer in the 4th largest city in America. From speeding car chases to the crossing of the thin blue line, author Mark S. Cariner seeks to find God's biblical truth in a behind-the-scenes look at law enforcement. And check out Mark's newest book, The Tactical Heart. Both are available at Amazon.com.
The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed is the latest book from Michael Lyons, the award-winning author of There is a Reaper. Featuring 13 original stories, this wide-ranging collection has everything. Forbidden love, gods versus demigods, weird invading aliens, sexy seductive artificial intelligence, and unusual passion between the living and the dead. All set amidst fantastic worlds of pain and loss and boundless joy. From the sublime to the macabre to the bittersweet, The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed will leave you breathless with laughter, brimming with tears, trembling with suspense. Available now on Amazon.com, Google Play, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. Rick Riordan fans, love mythology with plenty of action and humor? Destroyer's Blood is for you. The new fantasy novel by award-winning author Michael Lyons is book 1 of the adventures of Dev Kalian, the Blood series. Follow Dev and his magic sword Betrayer as they are suddenly attacked and forced to return to Olympus to fight in a war they want no part in. The world of men and gods is about to be destroyed by Zeus's ancient foe, and only Dev and Trey can stop him. The conflict never stops, and the amazing twist will have you on the edge of your seat. Act now while the ebook is on sale for only 99 cents. Destroyer's Blood is available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. And while you're there, get the free prequel, It's in the Blood, available for a limited time. The wait is over. First Blood, Book 2 of the Blood series is out. Your favorite bad boy thief Dev is back, and the beautiful and deadly Trey is right there with him. She is sharp, sexy, and full of surprises. Their adventures continue as a new power arises to threaten the world. The heart of creation is under attack, and time is definitely not on their side as they battle against their enemies' undead hordes. Can they unlock the hidden power that can defeat him, or will his forces draw first blood? Get all 3 installments in the series. Book 0, It's in the Blood. Book 1, Destroyer's Blood, and the new release, Book 2, First Blood, today. Available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, and most other fine e-tailers.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to get back to the soul of the Everyman with Michael and Margaret Lyons.
That's right. Thank you very much, Steve-Man. And it is time. And tonight we're talking about the relativity of time. And it's not it's not Einstein, and it's not It's not your relatives. It has to do really with how we all, in living through time, can also kind of transport ourselves and be transported through time. Oh, not physically. Your body doesn't move through time. Your body is dragged along with everything else in the universe forward through time. But your soul, and maybe before we go too much further, we as spirit and as incarnate souls have an infinite aspect, a timeless or a non-time bound aspect to ourselves. And you mentioned in the last half hour that only human beings can do this. It's one of the things which ties us to the divine, is the ability to move ourselves through time. And because we are who we are, though, down here, we can inadvertently lose, not just move, but lose ourselves in a time or in times in the past. And a piece of ourselves can be stuck, oftentimes through trauma. But yet at the end of your life, you're still a whole being. You're still a whole consciousness. And you are either perforce or with intention have to reunite and reconnect and realize that those are not just valuable but priceless pieces of yourself that you've had to separate from and you need to get back to.
Right. And to understand that it is part of your emotions or your energy, the life force that rises in you, that gets stuck back there. And it's stuck because of the experience. Which when you think of that, it's like that's truly amazing. That it is the experience that you yourself are going through that can allow a piece of you to be stuck in that point in time. Frankly, animals don't go through anything like that.
And we can sometimes even be envious of the fact that they don't.
Mm-hmm. They start anew. They do have a limited memory. Whenever something is good, they can find a certain food, whether it be a tree that's blooming at an appropriate time, or the fact that humans leave their garbage out at a certain day. They can remember things like that. But it has nothing to do with the experience that they had at that moment, and there's no regret there, okay? It's, oh, gee, I shoulda. It's like they don't do stuff like that. Animals in general, they're in the now and feed me, pet me.
Love me.
Right.
And they, of course, they remember trauma from the point of view they'll shy away from something that hurt them. But human beings will through, in the current now, where nothing is hurting them, but a trigger will come, and you'll be in agony, as though you had just been, whatever had caused that emotional trauma had just happened that moment. And as you said, the full body is involved. Your heart's racing, your head is pounding. Everything about you is as though that, and you can even be transported back to the emotions that you might have felt towards another person or another persons who were involved in that thing, who may be long gone. They may be, you may have not seen them or had any contact with them, or they may have passed on for many, many, many years. But yet, because that piece has power, a memory, a mental memory, that happened to me once, a long time ago, can be called to mind intentionally. Say, oh yeah, I remember when. It usually doesn't have very little, or maybe they'll very little. Oh yeah, and I didn't like that. I didn't like this. But these things of you, these pieces of you that you've left in the past, are feral in one regard. They have the power to take you from the present moment and bring you back, in essence, bodily, in time, back to that moment. When you separate yourself, you give it all the power you had at that moment, and it's there.
Mm-hmm.
So, I love this discussion, but if we were to move back, the importance of this is that it happens to us. The danger of it is that it can happen a lot, and you can end up leaving so much of yourself in the past that your current present self is crippled. A case in point, someone may have gone through a trauma where they said, I never want to experience this again. But in the present, they can no longer experience grief, or they can no longer experience love, or they can no longer experience, because there's so much of them is stuck back there. I'll never be able to do X, Y, or Z because I can never get over whatever it is that maybe happened 30 years ago. Well, those types of separations become toxic. They become detrimental to your current living soul experience. You can't continue to experience life in the full if that much of you, or those many pieces of you, because it can happen multiple times, are left back there. Each one wanting to be heard, needing to be processed, unprocessed, unheard. It can be so bad that your current you is like a zombie.
Yes. Yes, and then people want to give you drugs.
Or wonder what's wrong with you.
Right. Right. And it is something that needs to be looked at, because this mechanism is quite basic to every human being. And if you don't realize how you function as a human being, it can cripple you.
Because I know you've done this, and I know you've done this with people, can we talk about a couple of tools or techniques that people can use? Maybe one or two things that they can do, even through their own, because sometimes you need therapy and you need help to get back there. And if you feel you do, you probably do. But I know you've guided people through a couple of these things.
Soul retrieval, usually you need help with, because you are so completely enmeshed in it. There isn't a super easy way, like you do this, the whole list of, well, you got to do this, 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 and this. You need someone who is quite stable and grounded to be able to have you do that, because this is one of the reasons why a lot of the shamans would be doing soul retrieval for their people. But they had basically had always said that, this is not for the neophyte to do on their own. You need a strong and steady hand to be able to do this. Now, not to say that you can't do any work, but one thing I would like to suggest, maybe is the best way, is to understand that deep within you is that spark of the divine. Your spirit is there. And it is through that you can come to wholeness. If you understand that this problem is bigger than you, because that's the problem with, say, giving advice to people. Maybe you should try this. You have to acknowledge that there are certain things that you need help with. You need intervention with. And divine intervention would be ideal. So that spark of the divine that is in you, your spirit, which is eternal, is always there. And that in and of itself is the key. You're going to have to open your heart enough to be able to love yourself enough to allow the healing. Because sometimes people don't want to let go of the trauma. They feel that it defines them. And this is not a pejorative. I'm not judging anyone. Just what happens. Part that doesn't want to receive the full healing because they feel that this trauma identifies them. They've taken it as their identity. This is who I am, which is not true. You are so much more than the trauma you've gone through. So much more. But to be able to open your heart enough for yourself, because believe it or not, you can harden your heart to yourself. That's one of the hardest battles that you could ever go through. The battle with oneself. So to embrace that, to take that first step, is like, I can't do this by myself. I can't do it with everything I thought all these tools I may have gathered, all these books I may have read, all the therapy I'm going through. Unless you're ready to receive it, truly embrace it, and assimilate that trauma, or assimilate that part of you that's holding the trauma, and let the trauma go. Then there's nothing really anyone on the outside can do for you. But if you give permission, then your heart can soften to you and open to you and love. And to receive that love is one of the hardest things I think people have, because I can hear the response being, what do you know about it? You know how painful this was? This is more pain than I've ever imagined, and how can you even... It's easy for you to talk. Okay. I would like people to understand that in doing a retrieval like that, you must be able to touch in to that moment of pain and know that another understands that level of pain. And there are people that do. They can be with you in that pain. And once that's acknowledged, that you're not alone, because that's the temptation, to believe that you're not alone.
That you are alone.
That you are alone.
Right.
And to understand you are never alone. Never alone. Because the spark of the divine is within you. And everything you've gone through is seen through divine eyes. With divine eyes. I'd like to just propose this analogy for people to understand, okay? To understand that pain is very familiar to our Lord and our Savior. You're nailed to that point in time. The analogy is being nailed to your cross. This is the cross you must bear through this timeline. And the only way you can get through it is by allowing that unconditional love that God has for us and we have for that which is infinite. We are talking about the infinite part of you. And that abides in love. It exists in love. So for you to receive that unconditional love, you have to give permission. And the first step really is giving permission, even when you don't feel like it.
And I think that there's some fear involved there. You know, the traumas that we're talking about can range in size. And the ones that cripple people are big ones, generally speaking. They're big ones. They're points that they when they tore their soul off it was a point of extreme pain or extreme stress or extreme fear, where, or all three together, where they had as a survival. The reason that you do this is a survival mechanism. You do this because otherwise you feel that your psyche, your soul would be destroyed, or it would be
or
so
your body.
Or your body. But the body reacts in one way and the soul in another, and this tearing off of self and leaving it in the past is a survival mechanism. So it has, when you try to go back there, you're going back to rescue a piece of you that you thought was dying, or that was given up, in essence, to save the rest of you. It was like a sacrificial thing. Well, it's still there, and you need to reconnect to it, because it will, in the sense that it was so powerful of a response, it's also so powerful of a drain on you. I think part of the fear is going back and re-experiencing it, but part of that fear is, the other part of it is you're going to take the part of you that survived and go back to rescue the part of you that might not have. That it's like putting all of you back in danger. It can feel that way. So again, you're right. Call them a helper or a guide or somebody who has the experience with this to assist is essential. I was going to say important, but it's probably essential for the big ones, for the ones where you're crippled, where your current existence is negatively affected by that past or those past traumas. I think you also mentioned, maybe you said this earlier, but being able to give voice to that piece of you is so important, because oftentimes those past encapsulations have muted that piece of you, and the things it needs to say you don't want to hear. You know what I mean? You intentionally muted it. So there's a fear there too, is that sometimes you have to go back and listen to yourself say something that you never wanted to hear you say or hear said to you, but you need to hear it.
Yes, it's re-experiencing, but also you have to be very grounded in your consciousness. Okay, so that you're not swept away by the emotion. And that takes a lot of grace and practice to be able to do that. If you approach it with great love, then you have the ability to do this. Great love. No judgment, no shame, just great love. This must come back home. You must come home now.
Shame is a good word there. And I think that's the other thing that separates people from this, is that they feel guilty about it. Guilty about leaving that piece of you back there. A judgment that was passed on by you on you, which is, if you want to look for the worst person in the world, that's to you, the person who's hardest on you is generally you.
No, it's true. You don't really give yourself very much by way of grace or mercy.
No excuses.
And so that's where the stumbling block is, to understand that you yourself need this. You can't do it by yourself. You can't do it by saying, well, no, you can't do that. Or being hard. Being hard on yourself doesn't do anything.
Well, I think people are taught, you mentioned earlier about people being taught not to be angry. People are taught to be hard on themselves too. And that if you're hard on yourself and unforgiving of yourself, you'll be hard on others and unforgiving of others. And you'll also deny yourself things that you need.
Yes. And it's something that you must learn how to be forgiving and gracious to yourself and to others. It doesn't mean you be foolish, But it does mean that you understand and see it. You know where it comes from. And you're able to draw a line of, well, this is where this can operate. And this is where we're going to grow.
We only have a few more minutes, but could you talk a little bit about, in doing this, what have the results been for certain people? Because I know you've helped people with this, where sometimes their a degree of separation was so great that the reconnection took a lot of time, but it was important. So, without naming any names,
You want me to talk about?
Well, the effects of reconnecting, and sometimes the process. It took a while, yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you've disconnected yourself bit by bit like that, there's a couple ways that can happen. Truth. I mean, it's not just your emotions, but like I said, with your mind, you can disconnect pieces of your thought structures to almost like a multiple personality thing.
Yeah.
And you see that with especially now with social media. This is the face that I've put together in the presentation that I want for this audience. But this audience over here, this is the way I want to look. And the audience over here at work, this is what I'm presenting. And then the idea that you have to keep all those straight, you wind up parceling your consciousness like that, and it could drive you crazy.
But in helping people reconnect.
In the reconnection, it's understanding that you get to choose.
Exactly.
And so instead of choosing dissonance, which is the face is different from who you are, you would have to bring all those faces back to you. Do you love yourself enough to present a true face to the world, not a broken face?
I think, we didn't talk about our quote, but I think what you're doing there, therefore, is reintegrating yourself into the present moment, and then reclaiming back your power to choose. I think a lot of these traumas happen because you felt at the moment you had no choice, or you were given no choice. And in reintegrating, and that's a process that takes, without trying to make anything less of it, it's a huge process. But in reintegrating, you reclaim the power to be all of you, and the power to be in the moment, and to choose, and to choose not to disintegrate yourself, but to keep yourself integrated and find the way to preserve all of you in choice and in the now.
You have to make the decision that this is what you want to do. And then everything has got to give the assent for it.
Right.
Okay, your mind has to say yes. It will be who I am, and not a projection of who I am. And your soul has to be there as well as your body. Everything, every part of you has got to agree that this is who I am, and accept that. And once that agreement comes together, that alignment, maybe that's the best way to put it, everything has got to come in alignment. You'll understand that the soul, your soul, opens up, and your spirit is right there watching you and knowing that this is who you've always been. But everything has to agree before your spirit can come in and begin the integration. The integration happens when you receive the fullness of your divine spark. And then everything comes together in process, in burning.
Burning. Well, and it does take a tremendous amount of time, but we are we are out of time, but just we are time. We are time. We are beings in time, but we are beings that can move through time. And I think it's our time now to say, I'm Michael Lyons.
Oh, we're already at the end.
We've reached our time.
Okay. And I'm Margaret, and thank you for listening.